Welcome back to Spoiled Vision Movie Recaps. Today, I'll take you through the events of the 2016 sci-fi romance film, Passengers. Spoiler alert. The Avalon, an interstellar spaceship en route to the colonized world Homestead II, glides through the cosmos, unmanned, on autopilot. Its 258 crew members and 5,000 passengers remain in hibernation. A perilous encounter with an asteroid belt weakens the ship's shields, forcing a diversion of power to the main shield. The vessel hurtles toward a colossal asteroid, and the inevitable collision triggers various system malfunctions. Although the ship initiates self-repairs, one of the hibernation pods inexplicably activates, rousing Jim Preston, a mechanical engineer. An automated system assists his reawakening, revealing that he has been in suspended animation for 120 years, with only 4 months left until Homestead II. Jim receives instructions about his ID band, cabin, and scheduled activities before planetfall. Eager and apprehensive about meeting his fellow passengers, Jim leaves his cabin and enters an automated classroom intended for a group learning experience. Anxious, he questions the holographic presentation, which describes an overcrowded, overpriced, and overrated Earth. The hologram urges him to save questions for later, but Jim's persistent inquiries about his solitude go unanswered. Realizing the hologram's limitations, Jim searches for other passengers but finds the main concourse deserted. An automated information desk offers its assistance. Seeking human contact, Jim requests to speak with a steward, but that encounter, too, proves fruitless. He escalates his request to see the captain, yet the bridge reveals no awake crew members. Undeterred, Jim proceeds to the observatory and discovers the disheartening truth. The ship remains 90 years from reaching Homestead II. Recognizing his premature awakening, he rushes back to the concourse and sends a desperate message to Earth, inquiring about returning to hibernation. The communication system delivers a devastating blow, estimating a 55-year wait for a response from Earth. Devastated, Jim explores further and stumbles upon the ship's bar, where he encounters another individual. Yet, there's something uncanny about the bartender, and Jim's realization dawns as he attempts to pour a drink. The bartender is in fact an android. Jim, eager to learn more, attempts to extract information from the android named Arthur. However, he struggles to explain his inexplicable early awakening. The next day, Jim awakens in his cabin and heads to the cantina, where he quickly discerns that most menu items are exclusive to gold-class passengers. He settles for a simple coffee and turns his focus to fixing his malfunctioning hibernation chamber. After acquiring the necessary tools, he attempts to repair it, but to no avail. Jim's determination leads him to try accessing the crew's hibernation chambers with the same tools, but his efforts yield no results, and minor malfunctions continue to plague the ship. He finds himself returning to the bar frequently, not only for drinks but also for conversations with Arthur. Arthur offers some advice that convinces Jim to venture into one of the gold-class rooms to experience some fun on the ship. Jim explores the various restaurants, games, and the entertainment system, but as time passes, his solitude becomes increasingly unbearable. One day, in a drunken state, he accidentally stumbles upon an airlock containing spacesuits for spacewalks. Jim dons one of the suits, steps into the airlock, and releases the outer door, immersing himself in the mesmerizing view of space. As the only conscious human in that moment, he detaches from the ship's magnetic boots and floats in space, overwhelmed by his isolation. Returning to the ship, he removes the suit but returns to the airlock without it, initially intent on ending his life. In a last-minute change of heart, he decides against it, but a mishap with a bottle distracts him. Jim rises and is captivated by a woman in one of the pods named Aurora. He delves into her files and listens to her passenger interview, growing enamored with her. He spends hours sitting beside her pod, continuing to listen to her interviews and reads her work in the bar, discussing her writing with Arthur. The irony of his situation becomes an obsession, having journeyed to another planet for a better life, only to awaken prematurely and find his perfect match, yet remain separated from her. Jim grapples with the idea of waking Aurora to alleviate his loneliness, but discusses it with the android, who fails to comprehend his moral dilemma. Initially, he decides against it, but as time passes, he can't shake the idea. Eventually, he resolves to awaken her. Jim activates her pod, then retreats to his room as she begins her awakening process. A little later, he heads to the main concourse, hoping to finally meet her. There, standing before Aurora, just as bewildered as he was a year ago, Jim informs her that they are the sole awakened passengers on the ship. He leads her to the observatory and explains that he can't access the ship's crew or primary controls. Aurora panics and desires to return to her hibernation pod. When they arrive at her pod, Jim grimly reveals the absence of equipment to facilitate their re-entry into hibernation, effectively conveying their stranding. Returning to the concourse, he advises her to rest, considering her recent awakening. She sympathizes with Jim, who spent over a year alone on the ship. Regret gnaws at Jim as he returns to the bar, where he implores Arthur not to disclose that he was the one who woke up Aurora. The following day, Aurora awakens and queries the automated information desk about the hibernation pods. Jim joins her, and they head to breakfast. As they leave, the information desk malfunctions. In the cantina, Aurora notices Jim has been consuming the same breakfast for over a year and orders him a menu from the gold class section. They discuss the possibility of repairing the pods, but unlike Jim, Aurora is not ready to concede defeat. She delves into research documents, explores the infirmary, and attempts to unlock the crew's hibernation quarters. Jim detects more malfunctions plaguing the ship. Over time, Aurora grapples with her existence on the Avalon. She writes, exercises around the ship, and swims in the pool, gradually coming to terms with their predicament. She interviews Jim in the cantina, contemplating that his story might be intriguing. He initially offers company slogans, but then elucidates his dream of becoming somebody on the new world, a place to build a meaningful life. Subsequently, they find themselves in the observatory, where Aurora reveals her own reason for being on the ship. She holds a round-trip ticket. Her intention was to live on Homestead II for a year and return to Earth, becoming the first journalist to do so, penning a remarkable story. As Aurora gradually relinquishes hope of resolving their situation, Jim devises ways to lift her spirits, taking her dancing, to the cinema, and to the basketball court. Finally, he introduces her to Arthur at the bar. Aurora relaxes momentarily until the weight of their situation returns, leaving Jim alone with the android, tormented by his actions. Later, Jim is seen tinkering with a project, while Aurora walks into the observatory to discover a miniature model of the Chrysler building that Jim crafted for her. They proceed to go on a date at the bar, enjoying a meal and sharing stories about their lives. Aurora confides in Jim about her father's death during her teenage years. Following dinner, Jim leads her to the airlock, where they don spacesuits for a joint spacewalk. It's the first time Jim has someone to share this awe-inspiring experience with. They disable the magnetic boots and float together in the vacuum of space. Upon their return, their shared exhilaration leads to a kiss, and they retire to Jim's cabin, becoming intimate. As time passes, they transition into a couple's life, with Aurora moving into Jim's cabin and documenting her experiences aboard the ship. They jog together, dine together, and share their nights together. Meanwhile, Jim continues to explore the ship and stumbles upon the hydroponics bay, presenting Aurora with flowers. One day, the ship passes by a majestic red giant, and they witness the spectacle from the observatory. For Aurora's birthday, they celebrate in one of the ship's many restaurants, and then at the bar. Jim excuses himself, ostensibly to the restroom, but in reality, he prepares a ring he crafted for Aurora. During his absence, Aurora converses with Arthur, who unknowingly discloses Jim's role in her awakening. Suddenly, Jim reappears, and Aurora confronts him in utter disbelief. She runs away in fury and panic. In his cabin, Jim discovers that all of her belongings have disappeared. The following day, he encounters her in the cantina, but as soon as he speaks, she flees. Aurora is consumed by desperation and anger, launching a physical attack on Jim when she visits his cabin. Engaging in conversations over the comm system, as she continues to evade him, Jim tries to apologize and clarify his actions to Aurora. He admits to falling in love with her, but she remains unforgiving, unable to forgive him for taking her life. One night, while Jim is in his cabin, another malfunction afflicts the ship, leading to a critical system error and a shutdown of the main controls. Later, he enters an elevator that malfunctions. In the main concourse, Aurora discovers that Jim has planted a tree. She proceeds to the cantina, where the food dispenser also malfunctions. Simultaneously, both of them hear the voice of the deck chief over the comms inquiring about the tree's planter. Rushing into the concourse, they meet Gus Mancuso, introducing themselves and detailing their situation. The deck chief is puzzled by how 3 pods could fail. Mancuso guides them to the bridge, realizing that the ship is experiencing issues requiring manual system checks. Exiting the bridge, they narrowly avoid a falling robot, and Jim and Aurora inform Mancuso of the escalating malfunctions. He emphasizes that such frequent malfunctions should not be occurring, instructing them on data collection procedures. While Mancuso inspects the pods, Jim joins him, disclosing what he did to Aurora's pod. The deck chief is deeply disheartened by Jim's actions. Later, while at the bridge, checking the collected data, Aurora joins Jim. They discuss the circumstances surrounding her pod, but Jim admits his inability to rectify the situation. Their conversation is interrupted when Jim enters with the 16th malfunctioning robot. Mancuso, feeling the effects of hibernation sickness, departs to rest. However, as he leaves, he coughs up blood. That night, Aurora struggles to sleep, prompting her to take a swim. Suddenly, gravity dissipates throughout the ship, causing her to nearly drown as the water from the pool follows her movements. As the gravity drive resets, Aurora barely survives. She and Jim encountered each other while rushing to find Mancuso. The 3 of them return to the bridge, gradually piecing together the ship's issues. Mancuso discerns that a major system failure occurred 2 years prior, and they must locate and repair the root cause, as the entire ship is overcompensating. If they fail to rectify it, the ship will remain stranded. Their quest to locate the problem is interrupted when Mancuso collapses, necessitating Jim and Aurora to transport him to the infirmary. His condition is terminal, with no available treatments to prolong his life. Later, the 3 of them convene in the observatory, where Mancuso entrusts Jim with his ID bracelet and implores them to fix the ship before passing away. Suddenly, the ship's lights switch to a distressing red, and violent shaking ensues. Jim requests Aurora's assistance, and they make their way to the engineering section. However, additional gravity drive failures occur, impacting Arthur as well, prompting Jim to deactivate him. Upon reaching engineering, they discover a breach in the hull caused by the asteroid. Aurora is sucked into the breach, and Jim, clutching the hatch, is also drawn in but manages to seal the breach. Immediately after this, they realize there are more hull breaches. They follow the asteroid's path and find it has struck the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can locate replacement parts for it. They manage to find the required part and replace it, but manual venting of the reactor fails. Jim deduces that he must open the vent door from outside the ship to cool the reactor. In the airlock, as Jim prepares to venture outside, he gives Aurora Mancuso's bracelet, uncertain if he will return. She assists him with his suit, urging him to come back, as she cannot bear to be on the ship without him. Aurora returns to the overheating reactor, where temperatures have reached critical levels. As Jim approaches the vent from the outside, he spots the door. In the reactor room, temperatures soar as he attempts to bypass the vent door. Realizing that he must manually hold the door open for the reactor to vent, he conveys this plan to Aurora. Although she dislikes the idea, Jim proceeds with it, insisting that they must save the other passengers. They argue, but Jim stresses the necessity of venting the reactor. Aurora ultimately complies, successfully venting the reactor. However, the fumes from the reactor propel Jim away, breaking his tether and causing a drop in his suit's pressure. He communicates the situation to Aurora. Aurora scrambles to retrieve another suit and rescue him. She dons the suit and ventures out to reach Jim, but finds her tether too short. She is pulled back, but manages to grab onto his tether, pulling him to safety. In the infirmary, she attempts to resuscitate him using Mancuso's bracelet to override the medical protocols. The medical pod revives Jim, and Aurora forgives him. Subsequently, Aurora repairs Arthur, and they conduct a proper space burial for Mancuso. Jim takes her to the infirmary and reveals that he has devised a way to use the medical pod as a hibernation chamber. He suggests she enter the pod to endure the remainder of the journey in hibernation. As the story unfolds, it becomes apparent that she declines the offer, choosing to remain awake with Jim on the ship. Eventually, Jim proposes to her, and they build a life together on the Avalon. 88 years later, the Avalon reaches Homestead II, awakening the crew who discover the ship in an unexpected state. Aurora leaves them a message recounting the life she and Jim lived on the ship while the rest were in hibernation. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notification for more movie recaps.